It's Vanessa Sayers, your Arizona Realtor. I feel it's absolutely necessary to address the huge news that was released yesterday in the media about the NAR settlement of $418 million. During this video, I'm going to go ahead and provide you guys with the facts of what we know so far. I'll be able to provide some color to you and what this really represents and what it means for buyers, sellers, and realtors going forward on based on what we've learned so far. And keep in mind that these highlights and this information will continue to change as we get closer and closer to implementing those changes. And to give you some background to the news stories, home sellers brought lawsuits against the NAR, the National Association of Realtors, because they were questioning why they had to pay for the buyer's broker's compensation in closed transactions. And for the purposes of understanding this video better, there are really 6 key players in a real estate transaction. There's the seller, the seller's broker, the seller's agent, the buyer, the buyer's broker, and the buyer's agent. And all realtors must hold their license at a brokerage firm. Some examples of brokerage firms are West USA, Realty, Remax, Edina. And for the purpose of the video here, I'm just going to be compacting the agents and the brokers into one so we can kind of just focus on 4 groups here. Let's go ahead and go back to the $418 million settlement. All right, so in layman's term, it's really just basically saying, why would the seller and the seller's broker determine what the buyer broker is going to be compensated for? The buyer and the buyer's broker should really agree to compensation together before the home purchasing process even starts. And commissions have always been negotiable. So this lawsuit is really going to change or spark changes that will affect the real estate market and the way the model currently flows. And that current situation is where the seller is paying both the seller's broker and the buyer's broker. So you may have seen some of this coverage in the news or in social media the last couple of days. You're probably hearing positive things, negative things, but I'm just here to give you some facts. And with that being said, let's go ahead and just talk a little bit and just explain exactly what it means to earn a commission in a real estate industry. So, when a broker produces a buyer who is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property, then they have technically earned their commission. And now that we've understood that, then we realize that commission is the way a realtor is really compensated for their work on a real estate transaction. Realtors are not compensated until the end or where the settlement happens of that transaction, which is typically after that closing date. I won't go into depth on exactly how the commission is paid, sort of through the brokerage, and then it gets paid to the realtor out of that. We won't cover that. We'll just keep it simple and basic for the purposes of this video. All right. And so there may be times when a realtor is working with a buyer for 2 months or for 2 years. And again, it really just depends on that specific situation. There's never really two situations that are ever the exact same. Each transaction always seems to be different, even with as far as how many homes they tour. There might be some, buyers who only look at 1 or 2 houses. Some may look at 50 homes. So again, it's really specific on each transaction. There's no commonality. It's just really up to that particular realtor and that buyer at that time. So no matter how short or long the process really takes for the buyer to find the right home, the realtor is not compensated until the very end of that transaction when it gets settled. And realtors are not volunteers, guys. So they're putting in the 2 months of work or the 2 years of work, but they're not getting compensated until the actual closing where that settlement happens. So again, we're going to keep this information factual. So, as far as what's happening right now in the media, what they're suggesting or stating is that starting July 1st, the MLS, which is the multiple listing service, they will no longer allow the co op description, which is that percentage or that dollar amount that is being offered to a buyer's broker for that particular transaction to close, and that is from or being paid for from the seller at this current time. So, again, that amount, that specific dollar amount, or that percentage is listed in the MLS currently, but July 1st, they're stating that it will be removed from the MLS system. And so, what they're wanting to actually happen is for the buyer and the buyer's broker to have a discussion before they even tour any homes, before they actually view any properties or anything like that. They want the buyer and the buyer broker to come to an agreement, sign a document stating exactly what the buyer broker will be compensated for helping the buyer purchase a home. So again, before they even go look at any homes, before they tour any homes, they will need to have that signed contract between the buyer and the buyer's broker, determining what compensation the buyer broker will get paid for that particular transaction. And so the way it currently works, the sellers and the seller's broker list that percentage or that dollar amount on the MLS, and that is what the actual seller ends up paying for. And that compensation, again, is coming from the seller in our current world. And from what my understanding is of what they're trying to change or what they're trying to accomplish, is that if the buyer and the buyer's broker come to agreement and the buyer broker compensation is one certain thing, um, the seller, if they do not agree to those terms, then the buyer will be responsible for the buyer broker's compensation. And again, commissions have always been negotiable, and that will continue to be negotiated. But let's go ahead and look at today's world, and let's just use some numbers here. So let's say the seller and the seller's broker came up with a 3% co-op being offered to a buyer's broker. If the house is $500,000, then the buyer's broker will be compensated with $15,000. Again, just to keep it simple, we're not going to be talking about splits. So I'm not talking about if they owe the brokerage firm anything or if they split with any partners or any teams like that. We're just keeping it simple. But in a $500,000 transaction with 3%, the $15,000 is what's going to be compensated for the buyer broker. All right, so let's go ahead and look at it as far as what they would like to do. So let's go ahead and switch the screen here. In tomorrow's world, let's again say that the changes go into effect of what they're trying to accomplish. The buyer and the buyer broker, they agree to getting compensated $15,000. So the buyer ends up finding a home. They want to purchase it, but the seller is only willing to offer the buyer broker $5,000. Then the buyer would be the one who's responsible for paying that $10,000 difference. So they would be responsible for paying that $10,000 difference because that is what the buyer and the buyer broker agreed upon before they even looked at any houses, before they toured any homes or properties. They agreed that the buyer's broker was going to get paid or compensated $15,000. So the buyer would be responsible for that difference. Okay, let's go ahead and look at another example here. So let's say the buyer and the buyer's broker agreed for the buyer's broker to get compensated $15,000 again, but this time the seller is offering to pay the buyer's broker $15,000. Then the buyer would not have to come out of their own pocket, and the seller would then pay the full $15,000. All right, let's go ahead and look at this last example here. So it can also go this way. So let's say the buyer and the buyer's broker, they agree in the contract before they looked at any homes or anything that the buyer broker compensation was going to be $15,000. All right. Now let's say the seller had already kind of agreed to offer $20,000 towards the buyer's broker. Then that means that the buyer broker will still only get the $15,000 because that is what the buyer and the buyer broker agreed to before they looked at any homes. They agreed to $15,000. Even though the seller is willing to pay 20, the buyer broker will still only get the 15. That's going to leave $5,000 on the table that the realtor will not be getting compensated. So that is that third example. All right, you guys, this is a lot of information. It's pretty heavy. It's a lot of detail. It's just a lot of information being thrown at you here. So if you want to have a private conversation about this with me, let's go ahead and schedule a meeting. We can talk more details. I can kind of throw it into what your unique situation is and just discuss it from your avenue, your perspective, and help you understand it just a little bit better because, again, it's a lot of information. So, yes, thank you so much for listening today. I will continue to provide you guys with updates on this topic for all my viewers and anybody who's watching. This is going to help arm yourself with knowledge and expertise in making decisions with your real estate goals. I'm happy to be part of this. If you have any questions, reach out. Again, here's my contact information. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.